Hello again, and welcome back to another edition of the Wiccan Conservative. I hope everybody is doing well today. It is another rainy day in the southern hemisphere, and actually really enjoying it. You see, I have my farmer's almanac here with me, and planting season is upon us. So I went ahead this year and I detailed out all the planting, and we are planting by the moon this year. So inside your farmer's almanacs, you will be able to uh, reference a planting by the moon phase guide, and it has most of the plants that people like to start for their home gardens. And the rain is very promising. It means that my soil will be nice and kind of wetted down, getting a lot of nutrients from all of the rainfall that is coming in. It won't start all dry and nasty. So I'm really excited for the little bit of rain. Hopefully that carries into the season. And it's pretty warm down here today, but it's supposed to get kind of cold moving into next week. So we shall see how that goes. And all of that is to lead us into the first story that I have for you guys today. And that is pertaining to the soil out in Los Angeles after the fires and as the wildfire cleanup actually starts to get underway. So, a lot of people are talking today about Karen Bass getting her comeuppance pertaining to the restrictions on individuals cleaning up their own properties after going through the devastating wildfires that Los Angeles went through, and the restrictions that are put upon these people as they try to go through this cleanup, right? So we know that California, in particular, is one of the most eco-preserving states in the nation. They have a lot of acts. I know if anybody gets Amazon shipments or anything that is imported into California, it has the Prop 65 warning labels on them and plenty other different specialty warnings that come into play for California in general in regards to toxicities that are in materials or could be hazardous to the public. So it is of no surprise to anybody that is familiar with all of that to hear something to the effect that even when it comes to cleaning up after disasters, that there's a rigmarole of process to go through in order to continue forward on the rebuilding and getting people back into their homes and getting people back to a level of safety in their communities. But this is coming off the heels again of Donald Trump laying into Karen Bass about putting all these obstacles in front of people who have enough obstacles in just wanting to clean up their property in the first place. And this is, again, a little bit of fear mongering that is piggybacking off of the same ideas that we touched upon yesterday when it comes to the administrations getting people motivated to do things their way. And no surprise, it is done majorly through fear mongering and authoritarian figure leaning, basically, meaning that they put all of their trust and certifications and points of action in the hands of individuals who they claim possess the proper knowledge on how to proceed with these events. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and look at why the feds won't test the soil after the wildfire cleanup and why this could potentially leave contamination behind. Here in the South, it's very common for individuals to burn out their fields, especially around this time of year as they are prepping everything to grow and reharvest in the spring. The fire actually propagates the soil, removes past contaminants that could potentially be in the soil from the last year's crops, and it helps, prep everything to absorb the good nutrients from the fertilizers that will be put on the fields later on in the spring after the threat of frost has passed. So, I find it strange that they are particularly worried about the contaminants that might be left behind by this fire, but we have to remember that the types of building materials and the in inhabitants' stuff inside their houses, like whatever their couches were made of, whatever their concrete contained, siding, fiberglass, insulation, carpets, bedding. You're talking about a lot of household items and materials that was reduced to ash and also destroyed in these fires. So I do see the potential for hazardous material, but going back to the prior comments about California having the highest restrictions on toxic materials to begin with, you would think then the things that their houses are made out of and the materials contained inside their homes wouldn't be that toxic to the environment. But I digress. Apparently, the decision by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers breaks with a long standing safeguard to ensure no lingering contamination is left behind after wildfires. Army Corps officials are saying that excavating 6 inches of topsoil is enough to rid fire devastated properties of hazardous pollution, and the decision was supervised by LA County officials. This is just interesting to me that they are breaking with their long-standing safeguard, quote unquote, and they're using this type of language, in my opinion, to attempt to encourage you to think that this is, strange behavior or something that hasn't been done by, people in the past, or, just trying to justify their past positioning on these pieces of legislation. Because if there's one thing that we've noticed throughout the short period of time that Donald Trump has been back in office, it is that the more you press these individuals to explain why the policy is the way that it is and explicitly how does it help, they don't have the answers for that, but they can pivot to it's a safety feature or it's for the benefit of the environment. And we're noticing that that's all fine and good when we're in a comfortable position, but when we are in the state of survival, it doesn't make sense to put all these obstacles in front of recreating a stable environment in which to live in. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers said Wednesday it won't order soil testing at properties damaged by the Eaton and Palisades fires after they've been cleaned up by private federal contractors. Private federal contractors. That just really contradicts itself in and of itself. But anyways, breaking with longstanding safeguard to ensure no lingering contamination is left behind by wildfires. Federal and state agencies have called for soil samples to be collected and analyzed at homes and schools cleaned by work crews after nearly every major wildfire in California for the last 2 decades. So, again, everything should be copacetic. If all the toxic materials and things to that effect were already taken care of, you should not be that concerned with it, first off. And number two, if it's a long-standing policy to test this soil, you can go back to the data that you already have and come to a generalized conclusion as a measure of moving forward. So the idea of like, okay, we'll clear the top 6 inches and that's the deepest we've ever had to go. That makes sense. You have lots of data to go back and look at that and say, okay, after this fire, it was 3 inches deep of contamination. After that fire, it was maybe an inch. This fire, it was a little bit further at 5, but the highest we've ever had was 6. Even if you wanted to err on the side of caution and do 7, fine. I don't understand, why this would be a pause in the cleanup measure to determine how to move forward. Again, this is going back to creating policy that requires you to think about who you're going to put in place to carry out that policy before ever actually touching the problem. And the problem is people don't have a place to live. So the process is known as confirmation sampling, and it's intended to verify that the soil at these properties is no longer toxic. It doesn't have any toxic chemicals, and the state's cleanup standards for toxic laden ash and rubble are being removed up to the state standards. So whatever that particular level of contamination that is acceptable for the state of California, that's what they want removed. And apparently, that's including the 6 inches of topsoil off top. So it sounds to me like you already have a process. Why, if you want to test the soil, fine, test it, but test it as people are cleaning up. Or again, make sure that the people are aware. If you build, then, and again, we already know that they can't hold the city accountable for any type of toxins in the environment anyways. So that's again why these EPA things just don't make sense to me. There are qualified immunities within the government to protect them from anybody claiming that they failed at their job of protection. Yet, as citizens, we consistently go back to the government to legislate protections. Can somebody please make that make sense to me? But I digress. On the heels of the most costly wildfires in the state's history, Army Corps officials are saying that excavating that 6 inches of topsoil is enough to rid the fire devastated properties of hazardous pollution. So that's what the Army Corps officials are saying. I'm agreeing with them for the record. At the news conference in downtown on Los Angeles Wednesday, the Army Corps Colonel Eric Swenson explained the decision by saying soil sampling wasn't authorized in this disaster response. And that's true because Donald Trump said, cut the red tape, get these houses rebuilt as fast as possible. It's nice to own land, but it's even better to have a place to live. So, owning a piece of land with devastation, like you see here, is not advantageous to anybody. When the state does a request for direct federal assistance, they make that request of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Swenson said, and we get brought on to do a specific scope. And so these are the limits of what we can do under this disaster. The Army Corps is told these are instructions and guidelines. We have to stick to those guidelines. So FEMA didn't immediately respond to a request for comment, and Los Angeles County officials expressed surprise over the Army Corps' decision. Why are you surprised? there is a new sheriff in town, and he quite literally spoke to your local administration and told them unequivocally, under no certain circumstances are these people to be hindered in their efforts to rebuild on their own properties. Going back to the base principle that, yeah, it's nice to think that the state's looking out for you and you're going to have extra protections and consumer, advocacy groups and yada, yada, yada. But right now, we are really more concerned with putting a roof over our heads, rebuilding the necessary services to get life as back to normal as fast as possible. So the loss, they said that they are going to sit down and talk about this. Catherine Barger, chair of the LA County Board of Supervisors, said that they don't want to discount it. So they're going to have to regroup and figure this one out. Par for the course in California. This is exactly what we're talking about. Look, I don't care what the person looks like that's doing the jobs, okay? What I care about is if the job is being done and it's being done to quality. There's no excuse for these individuals to want to stop people who are motivated to do the things that are necessary to rebuild, regroup, and move on by regrouping and figuring out. Now, what does that actually mean? Like, think about it. When they talk about these sorts of things, this is what gets on my nerves, right? They want you to believe that this means that they are actively working on your behalf. But what does it really mean? It means that they're going to schedule a meeting so that people can have a conversation about a plan to move forward. And then what happens? They've actually got to reschedule another meeting so that they can come together and decide who's going to be in charge of each aspect of the plan. Then they've got to go and actually have another meeting that they go and make the arrangements for the plan. So once everybody's into place, then they've got to make arrangements for the plan. How long actually transpire does that take to transpire? All of that take to play out? In California, they were told 18 months in some cases. 18 months in some cases. We don't have to think about what would happen or what could happen if people are displaced for an indefinite amount of time. We can go back to Asheville. We can go back to the devastation in the mountains. We know that Donald Trump went down there and spoke to those individuals also. And they were willing, again, to go take care of their own houses, homes, roads. They only needed the people with the appropriate equipment to come in and help them do it. They lacked the equipment to do it. California has the people, has the equipment, has the money, and they want to schedule meetings, have conversations, regroup, micromanage the situation, and eat up precious, valuable time that people could be using to regroup their families, reestablish their homes, and build other things in the community, because once these people are done building their own homes, they can branch out and help other people who may not be in the same position that they were in. This is, again, quite literally building community in real time. So when you have local governments that hinder those processes, you need to reevaluate who's leading in this particular instance. Are the people confident? No. But are they capable? Absolutely. And it's a good time that they end up proving it to themselves that they can get in there and they can get the job done. And they don't need to wait around for an authoritarian figure to tell them what to do. The move will probably shift the burden to homeowners, businesses, and school districts to pay for testing to potentially arrange for more contaminated soil to be removed. Here we go with that fear mongering yet again. Oh my goodness. Why on earth would a homeowner think that they would be responsible for their own maintenance on their own properties? Why why would they think that that's not their own responsibility? Because you're trying to make them believe that you are more responsible for their things than they are. But doesn't that give you an edge, right? Like if somebody let you borrow something of theirs. It's not yours. You don't get to do whatever you want with it. Ultimately, the owner of that particular item has dominion and they can call it back to their own if they want it, or they can tell you what to do with it. Homeowners, business owners, school districts, guys, these are the most integral parts of our society. This should be on the burden of the people, not on the burden of the legislator. Under California policy, contaminated soil should be removed until wildfire affected properties come under state limits for toxic contamination, according to wildlife experts. And here it is again, throwing it back to that authoritative figurehead who's going to tell you because they know better on how to live your life. If they're not willing to do the conformatory sampling, that tells us they're willing to leave the properties contaminated, said Jane Williams, executive director of California Communities Against Toxics. This is how you know California really got oversaturated with bored housewives. Like, I know, Desperate Housewives and Real Housewives of it, or I'm sorry, not Atlanta, LA, Hollywood husbands and all that was enough to tell us that they're really, really freaking bored. But this right here, California Communities Against Toxics. There are so many more important things to form communities against that, I have to laugh. It almost makes you guys sound like the toxic Avengers. Like, I want to see Captain Planet rings and everything in this bitch, okay? Because that's what you guys look like. Earlier this week, Swenson told reporters that the removal of the 6 inches of topsoil is an acceptable level of debris to remove to ensure that we get any of the hazards that may have fallen on the topsoil as a result of the fire. But that assertion appears to conflict with previous analysis that showed dangerous levels of chemicals even after the federal cleanup workers clear a layer of topsoil. Okay, fine. I'm willing to bite on this piece of information if you can go back and show us in the data analysis and explain why, even after the federal cleanup, this layer of toxins reappeared. Does it have to do with cleanup in the area? Does it have to do with wind carrying debris from other regions? Where does this toxic layer of filth magically come from after a cleanup? During the cleanup of the 2018 Camp Fire, which destroyed the town of Paradise in Northern California's Butte County, Pasadena-based consulting firm Terra Tech was hired to test the soil on nearly 12,500 properties after the cleanup crews finished removing that 6 inches of topsoil. About a third of the properties, more than 4,200, still had toxic chemicals in excess of the state's standards, including brain damaging lead and cancer causing arsenic. Coming from where? In light of the soil testing, workers returned to those properties, in one case as many as 5 times, to dig out more contaminated soil in an effort to meet California's cleanup standards. Aren't these people going through a huge uh reoccurring situation where there's a bunch of earthquakes? Excuse me. And you're telling me that after all of your fires and things like this, you're removing soil? Yeah, California is going to fall into the ocean. Are you replacing the soil? Are you putting different nutrients in it? What is the baseline for the existing soil? I have a lot of questions in regards to this cleanup referral. Without soil testing, the Army Corps won't return to conduct additional soil removal in the Eaton and Palisade fire area. And again, just as a side note, why are we really allowing them to rely on federal testing if they want the testing done so bad? Where's your budget for it in the state? You have the state mandate for it, but you're holding the federal government accountable to maintain the state standard. I think that's a conflict of interest. A lot of these cleanup standards are aimed to protect people's health. Of course, they are, particularly thinking about vulnerable populations. The elderly, our young kids, and folks that have chronic diseases. We know oftentimes heavy metals stick around with the ash and soil. They're not going to easily dissolve or disappear. Hey, there's a Patty Parlor in the chat. At work, just lurking and loving. Thank you so, so much. I really appreciate it. You made a hell of a suggestion to me on X last night, and I'm actually thinking about taking him up on this. Uh, Patty suggested that we start a little bit of cooking in the kitchen. I made some cherry bread, some homemade cherry bread. So if you follow me on X, you can get a picture of that. But it was freaking delicious. And the recipes that I do are really super easy because as much as I like to cook, I don't like to cook, hard, expensive things. But yeah, we might be cooking in the kitchen on Rumble as live and, maybe into the future. So thank you again so very much for the suggestion. And if you guys get the chance, head over to Patty Parlor Games. He's doing great things on the channel, and you might even get the chance to check him out being a dad playing the tabletop games with his children. So that's super fun. But back to the LA County Department of Public Health, Barbara Ferrer, the director, she said that the lack of property by property testing is a legitimate concern. However, the county was working with federal and state academic institutions to better understand what toxic materials the ash contains. So, after everything that they have put together and presented to us in the analysis of the fires of the past and now moving forward with this devastating fire, they're admitting that they really don't understand what toxic metals the ash contains or where they come from. So they need to create another committee to find that out. Go figure. So far, more than 7,300 property owners have filled out forms to inform public officials how they intend to clear hazardous ash and rubble. Get a shovel and a trash can and just start going to town. Get a hose. Nearly 99% have opted for the Army Corps to remove debris and contaminated soil rather than private contractors. Gee, I wonder why. I know that there was, again, some debacle about the type of funding that was going to be used to pay for this removal of debris. And then they found out that they were using charity dollars in inappropriate manners. And now we have these homeowners who are more apt to rely on the federal Army Corps help than going to a private contractor, just reinforcing that local governments thought inside their little brain that, yeah, these people can't possibly do this without us. So the Army Corps this week began supervising the federal cleanup crews, clearing debris from homes in the at Altadena. I'm not from California, you can tell, and the Pacific Palisades. Workers operated excavators to pull large objects and mangled metal from building foundations, tossing debris into freight containers. They wore hazmat suits. They shoveled mounds of ash into plastic garbage bags. And tell me how that's any different than if I put on a, painter suit and did the same thing into my own plastic garbage bags or my own metal trash cans. It's nothing special, right? So then they prepared to remove the 6 inches of soil in an effort to rid properties of dangerous heavy metals that could pose a risk to returning residents. This approach to soil testing is one of the critical procedures prescribed under California's cleanup plan. Blah, blah, blah. Only 1 month into the county's wildfire cleanup, there have been several concerns, including the breakneck pace of clearing hazardous material and debris removal. Governor Gavin Newsom, who tooted, touted the fire ravaged communities as the fastest debris removal operation for a major fire in modern state history. Let's be crystal clear here, Gavin. This had nothing to do with you, sir. As a matter of fact, it sounds like the article itself is conflicted on whether or not they want to agree that the breakneck pace, to quote them directly, is a good thing or a bad thing. Because Gavin Newsom is touting it, they really, really want to say that it's a good thing. But because it was Donald Trump who put his foot down and said, you know what, we need to get this done as soon as possible, they're just kind of hesitating a little bit on saying that, yeah, it's a good thing that we are actually moving this stuff along and making it a easier process for the residents who are motivated to rebuild. So at Wednesday's news conference, LA County officials lauded the federal efforts to accelerate the pace of the cleanup. Mark Prestella, director of the county's public works department, announced that residents could begin submitting permits for rebuilding. We're open for business, he said. Now, this is the end of the article, and I'm just going to throw this out there as a little bit of foreshadowing. Who thinks that they are going to use this to bolster the idea that California's industry and economy is booming? Kind of like Joe Biden did after we reopened for the pandemic, right? Oh, we created all these jobs. No, actually, everybody just went back to work, Mr. President. No, you tell them we created those jobs out of thin air, and look at us. We're doing amazing. You can say a lot of things about the Democratic Party, but what you can't say is that they're inconsistent. Because boy, I tell you what, when they are set on their path, they go for it. So that leads us into our next story from the AP News. With the door closed to the US, asylum seekers turn to their plan B, a new life in Mexico. Well, would you look at that? Look at it. Look at that. Mm. This article is extremely interesting because it proves once again Donald Trump was right. When you put your foot down as a parent, your children start to think twice about acting up. Now, I know that you guys have had those troublemakers in your families and the ones that will do what they do regardless. But most of the time, your child will come to heel and you won't have to do anything but give them the look. And this is exactly what's happening in this particular case, in addition to ruling over California. So, if we scroll down in this article, it says that when Angelica Delago took a one-way flight to Mexico as she fled Cuba in December, she was set on seeking asylum in the United States. But after Donald Trump effectively slammed the door on asylum seekers crossing the US border when he took office last month, the 23-year-old recalibrated her plans. She decided she'd seek protection in Mexico. Okay, the Remain in Mexico policy. I know we all remember that little gem. Isn't that exactly what Donald Trump said? Look, if you're coming through multiple countries and all you want is relief from the discrimination and hardships from your home country, you should be willing to seek asylum in every country along the way. And in most cases, if you are who you say you are and your intentions are pure and you are a benefit, why wouldn't the first country that you run to want you as part of their society? Why wouldn't that be enough for you if all you're doing is running from persecution? But as we see in a lot of these cases, and I'm not knocking it, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing to want to come to the United States. I'm just pointing out a little inconsistencies in the logic. Why would you want to fly to a different country to attempt to enter the United States? I'm not the brightest crayon in the box, and I don't claim to know everything about how to apply for asylum, what's acceptable and what's not. But hear me out. Wouldn't you apply directly to the country? Wouldn't you look into what was the proper method? Because I'm pretty sure, now again, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure the right way is not to fly to Mexico and attempt to cross the Mexican border. I feel like those types of situations are reserved to the extremities. You are literally fleeing a foe or a persecutor who's chasing you out of a country, more or less. Okay. They know where you live, they know your family, they know this, they know that. And then, like the old Notre Dame Disney movie, asylum, asylum, please give me asylum. That's what I envision. Maybe I'm wrong. This woman here says, like most all Cu- like most almost all Cubans, almost all Cubans. Our objective was to go to the United States. Most people have that objective. It wasn't in our plans to stay, but now we have to face reality. This is in regards to her staying in Mexico. So I'd like to know, how do Mexicans feel about their country being used in this way? Because we talk a lot about when the immigrants get here and how dangerous they are in the United States, but I don't hear a lot of people actually addressing what type of devastation these individuals leave as they are walking to their predetermined destination. Are these people are going to have to do things to survive. I don't pretend to be naive to the street life or what people are willing to do to get food to survive. Okay. And in that type of situation, that's what you're talking about, not the New York situation where they're robbing bodegas and claiming it's for survival. We're talking like you're literally on foot patrol from Colombia all the way up through. So these people are going to be committing crimes on their way through these countries. They're going to have an impact on the society and the people who live there. But we want to pretend like that's not half the problem, because if these individuals in these countries were again stepping up and putting them in jail, I mean, they're letting their own people out of jail to come over here. That's why I think they've been majorly ignore it. But we wouldn't have the many criminals to lock up or to deal with in this country. Yet, it's amazing to me that people honestly believe that these violent people aren't violent in their home nations, or that they're only violent in their home nations and when they get to the United States. But along the way, they're just nice to everybody and they just, make friends along the way. But I digress. Amid a clampdown on asylum under Trump and tightening restrictions in the recent years under the Biden administration, Delago is among a growing number of migrants from across the world to ditch or at least pause their ambitions of reaching the US and focus instead on building a life in Mexico. That's what I want. I mean, I wanna address the, former part of this sentence, but we'll talk about the latter part at the moment, because ultimately, god damn it, that's what you should want. You should want your country to be as great as America. You should want your people to be proud of living in their country and not say such nasty things. Donald Trump gets called all these things for literally telling the truth about crime statistics across the world. Meanwhile, all the individuals that come here talk shit on their home countries. I left because they are poor. I left because they won't let me be me. I left because I can't own things. I left because I couldn't go to school. I left because of this. I left because of that. That's why you're here, right? Because you didn't like it there. And we don't talk about you going and picking a country and putting your skills to work in that country and making that country great. Again, if you want to come to America and help make America great, wonderful. I am here for it. But at the end of the day, you cannot come here expecting us to make your life better and give us nothing in return. So, back to the former part of this wonderful sentence that the AP has put together here. I don't know if you guys heard it as I stumbled over my words. Amid a clampdown on asylum under Trump and tightening restrictions in recent years under the Biden administration. I want to know who edited this piece of work and how long they laughed at that phrase. Tightening restrictions in recent years under the Biden administration. They're actually going to try to back this up further down in in the article here. So, Delaga was among hundreds of migrants from Cuba, Venezuela, Haiti, Afghanistan, and other countries gathering outside the refugee agency in Mexico City after Trump unleashed executive orders last month meant to slash access to asylum and militarize the border. The Associate Press spoke around to half a dozen people who had asylum appointments in the U.S. through the Biden era app, CBP1, that Trump canceled on Inauguration Day. They were left stranded on the Mexican side of the border, their dreams of a legal pathway into the U.S. snuffed. So, okay, they want you to believe that Biden was tightening his measures. Yet, meanwhile, they are telling you that Biden actually created a CBP1 app that actually allowed these individuals to schedule asylum claims on their cell phone devices. Okay. That's crazy. That to me doesn't sound like it's tightening restrictions. To me, sounds like you're making it easier. Now, many more said they intended to seek asylum in Mexico, citing increasingly harsh restrictions in the US in recent years, or what they said was an anti immigrant sentiment there. Now, it's the Mexican dream, said a Mexican man helping Haitian friends try to get an appointment this month to apply for asylum in Mexico following the Trump's executive orders. They said the risks of returning to Cuba were far too great following a government clampdown on protests in recent years. That's for Delago and her partner. This guy helping the Haitian friends is, just being a good guy. My question is, where were you for years? How many Haitians are you willing to take in? And can they get work? That's great for them if they can make their lives great in Mexico. Please. Delago says she's an architect and her partner is a doctor, but they aren't able to work in their fields in Mexico because their training in Cuba is not recognized there. So for now, she's washing dishes in a market. This is where it gets extremely interesting for me because my question is, how is it that we as the United States take these individuals in, recognize their skills, claim that, it's good to go across the board, but Mexico's having a problem with their training, their education, their performance. I mean, come on now. If the United States were to say some shit like that and say, you know what, we don't accept your education from Cuba. We don't accept your doctorate degree. We don't accept your architecture uh, diploma. We would get we would get eaten alive. I mean, again, Trump calls out crime statistics in these places that are provable, and he gets eaten alive. Now, the AP is going to claim that Mexico has long opened its doors to refugees and exiles, but asylum applications have soared in recent years, growing from, and this is where they're going to attempt to justify the numbers, 1,295 claims in 2013 to a record 140,982 claims in 2023. So I'm guessing that that's the claim to fame they're giving to Biden is that, oh, in 2023, the claims for asylum in Mexico skyrocketed. But I'd be willing to bet that a majority of those numbers came either after the November election or just on the heels of the November election. Just my guess, little shot in the dark there. That number dipped to 78,975 in 2024 as the CPB1 app allowed migrants in southern Mexico to apply for appointments for entry into the US before heading to the northern border. So now you see exactly why these individuals are finding it extremely advantageous to establish themselves in Mexico first before they even attempt to head to the northern border. So it's very obvious that after Joe Biden came out and said everybody should get asylum, everybody should seek asylum, he went out and created this app to allow it asylum to be accessible to everybody at the click of a button. And now we are seeing that since those two particular things were shut down, people have already got the message. They know they are not going to waltz in here as easily as they did before. Their claims for asylum are going to be scrutinized, and it better be legitimate, you asking for this exemption. So, amid criticisms over the backlog, President Claudia Sheinbaum has sharply boosted funding for Mexican agencies handling migration and asylum. Is it really amid the criticisms, or is it because Donald Trump is in office and he told you point blank, you're going to take these people back? We are not playing anymore. We're not doing the CBP1 app. It's not going to be at the click of a button. Come get your pre furnished house and bank card. There you go. Venezuelan asylum seeker Harry Lizardo, 37, said life in Mexico is an improvement after scrambling for years to scrape by in Ecuador and Chile. Which brings me back to the original point of asylum. If you are really leaving your country due to duress, hardship, persecution, or any other legitimate asylum claim, you can find a beautiful life in a country that is much more comparable and closer to you. And it doesn't demean you in any way. Like, I think that, the people that live in Mexico are quite proud to live in Mexico. And it's a shame that individuals refuse to think that making these asylum claims is not somehow degrading the country of origin, and why it's so important to clamp down on these claims of asylum in order to stop that from being the reputation of that country in the future, right? So if you lose all your citizens and all your citizens are telling you it's because your government's oppressive or because your people are doing this to us, or it's an uncomfortable lifestyle. How do you think these countries get a bad rep to begin with? People flee. People leave that area and they refuse to return until the regime changes, until the quality of life changes. And, back in the day, yet the original Cuban migrants did want to go back to Cuba eventually. They wanted to, go back to their culture and their heritage. They just felt that they were pushed out of it. And it's a shame that we forgot that, you can be proud of the country that you're from while you're living in that country. You don't have to come to the United States and try to convince us that the country is so great. You can just go there and you can make that country great again. I mean, more power to you. Please. We would love to have more, not healthy competition, but a better way to converse betweenst each other. Imagine if everybody was on the same level as, Great Britain, as Japan, as the United States. If we were all competing on a global market and free exchanging goods on that level at the same capacity, could you imagine the type of world that we would be able to live in? Honestly, I think that should be the goal, but I digress. That brings me into this next case here from Newsweek, and it goes hand in hand with the immigration asylum seekers. Not only are more asylum seekers staying in Mexico, and, I'd be willing to even say that they're probably staying in Canada too. Anybody that's trying to get over the northern border, you're probably finding yourself a pretty nice life in Canada. And hey, the really great thing about that is they're basically American anyways, even though they don't like it when you say that. This from Newsweek. Pam Bondi announces lawsuit against New York over immigration. You're next, she says, and I am all here for this. On Wednesday, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced that the Department of Justice has filed a civil lawsuit against New York Governor Kathy Hochul and State Attorney General Letitia James, both Democrats, for allegedly failing to enforce federal immigration laws. Bondi said the lawsuit was also filed against Mark Schroeder, the New York Department of Motor Vehicles Commissioner, and the state of New York, and the civil lawsuit was reportedly filed in Albany County Federal Court. This is a new DOJ, she said. We are taking steps to protect American citizens. As you know, we sued Illinois and New York didn't listen. You're next, Bondi said. Newsweek reached out to Hochul, James, and the New York DMV for comment on Wednesday evening. So I imagine that they did not respond. And how can you respond to a claim like that? This will be very interesting as it moves through the federal circuit to find out exactly who is responsible for the immigrants who have already been adjudicated through the court system. So we are hearing a lot of things about not only how immigrants are getting into the country, but how Donald Trump is faced with challenges removing immigrants who are already inside the nation. So that becomes a little bit of sticky wickets, and it becomes a states' rights issue over a federal authority. And it also gets kind of sticky when you're talking about people who are otherwise law abiding citizens. And I say otherwise law abiding citizens because they have, in most cases, broken the law to enter illegally, maintain a job illegally, possibly get benefits illegally, and possibly have illegal housing. So you're talking about a multitude of offenses that are all related to survival. So it's not like you can get away with not doing one thing or another, but you're also going about it in such a way that you blend in with Americans. Now, a lot of people are saying things like, illegal immigrant rights and so on and so forth. But I want people to understand that we aren't saying to pump the brakes on these, deportations because we're afraid of infringing upon immigrants' rights, illegal immigrants' rights. We're worried about the potential ramifications for the American citizens and what type of things that the federal government can go through in order to reach their goal. So, if a illegal immigrant cannot be determined to be an illegal immigrant outside of a court process, you run the risk of violating the rights of an actual American citizen, right? So you don't want to get caught with your pants down violating rights of citizens in your efforts to remove illegal citizens or illegal immigrants or not even citizens. So it becomes very, very tricky. So it's not that I want to rush to make these judgment calls or make a mistake. But I'm also not advocating for illegal immigrants to be treated by the court system in a special fashion, especially in ways that American citizens don't get the benefit of when they're accused of crimes. So at this point in time, we have a bunch of people who are hopping online. They're, giving out their free legal advice, and a lot of people's backlash to their voicing these concerns and these rights and these, protections of the law to everybody in the citizenry, whether you are here legally or illegally. The police force and the authoritarian figures are contracted to act with the Constitution at the forefront of their activities. So you have to understand that these people are walking a very fine line. And we know that in a lot of cases, the line is blurred and crossed. So we are just trying to restrict that from becoming wielded against the American people. And it makes for a very hard sell. Now, why does this matter? Because Donald Trump was elected off the back of a campaign focused on illegal immigration and the promise of mass deportations, which proved to be popular among the voters both before and after Election Day. But it's also important because we've never undertaken a project of this magnitude before. And if we're going to execute it properly and want to put these types of restrictions into play for consistency and posterity and move progressively into the future with a policy, we have to execute it right. It has to be done with the American citizens' best interest at the forefront of this. And I think that beginning with these court cases, starting with holding these individuals accountable, you could start to set precedent in the court system. So, what to know? Last week, the US government filed a lawsuit against the state of Illinois, city of Chicago, and Cook County in a federal court, saying their sanctuary city laws obstruct Trump's immigration enforcement policies. Bondi's announcement that New York was next focused on the state level leadership rather than New York City specifically. This is important because I'm tired of trying to play the game that the agency is the boogeyman. Oh, it's the agency's fault. It's written this way. It's the policy. It's the bureaucracy behind the man. No, most of the time it is individuals inside these positions, inside these agencies who are making the final decision. It can be based loosely on policy, it can be based loosely on whatever. But there is an individual with a face, a name, and a physical body who can be held accountable for their decisions. The new attorney general said she was seeking to force states to comply with federal law and assist with immigration enforcement, despite the precedent set out by the US Supreme Court that it is the federal government's responsibility to enforce immigration law. This trips me out to the fullest extent because the sheriff's departments, and if you go back and you watch Chris Ann Hall's constitutional presentation, the constitutional role of a sheriff, it is indeed the sheriff's job to protect the municipality, his area, whatever the district name you want to call it. It's his job to keep the federal government at bay or conjunct his department to work in coordination with that agency, not according to law, but in accordance with the Constitution. So, I believe again, Chrisanne did a wonderful job breaking this down. And just to sum it all up in this nice little neat nutshell, please go check out her channel. She's absolutely the best. She's wonderful. My woman crush every day. But anyways, the states themselves are reliant upon the federal government to protect the border. But that doesn't mean that they have to not comply with the federal government's efforts to remove the illegal immigrants. And that's what's happening in sanctuary cities. But in the same turn of cheek, these sheriff's departments did not stand up for you during COVID. They did not stand up for your banking institutions. They didn't stand up for your religious institutions. They didn't even stand up for your small businesses in your communities when the federal government forced you to shut down for a virus that you couldn't see and had little to no impact on healthy functioning individuals. Meanwhile, they will protect a group of individuals who do not pay their salary 90% of the time. What is going on? We can either wield the power of the sheriff, constitutionally speaking, on behalf of the American citizens, or you can wield that power politically, however you see fit. And you guys can make the discernment as to who's doing which side of that argument. But in my opinion, it's crystal clear that these sheriff's departments knew their role, knew their constitutional oath at the time of COVID, and chose not to protect the American citizens. Yet, here we are 5 years later, and they are choosing to protect illegal immigrants who have already been adjudicated for deportation through our own court system. We've given them the due process. We went through the proper channels, and this is what we are being given. So kudos to Pam Bondi. Excuse me. Part of Pam Bondi's argument against New York State Department of Motor Vehicles is the green light law, which allows immigrants without legal status to obtain driver's license, does not include their immigration status on the document, and offers protections for immigrants from discrimination. So this is again how a lot of these people are able to blend in with society seamlessly and pose a danger to you as an American citizen and your rights. It's not just, oh, this violent immigrant could potentially do something crazy in the community. To remove these people, to get to the bottom of all of their crimes, and to establish their actual, origins, you have the risk of actually harming individuals who were born here, who are actually, entitled to be in this country because they're here legally. And that includes the migrants that did it legally. You're fucking them too. Excuse my language, but seriously, you are jumping the line and obtaining things that these people are paying out their ass for, that they're waiting for years to obtain and do the things properly. So Bondi was joined by Tammy Nobles, the mother of a woman killed by an MS-13 gang member from El Salvador, who was released by the Border Patrol in 2022. He was flown to Maryland and went on to kill Kayla Hamilton, 20, shortly thereafter. So I'm just going to leave this particular article right here because, again, those are the types of things that we're being told is happening. And I'm not saying that they're not happening. And I'm not saying that that's not important. I'm not saying that that's not scary. But to me, that again is an instance that most people are not going to experience. We can empathize for it. We can have sympathy for the family and the victims and the community involved. But the biggest threat and the threat that comes to all of us is the potential for the authoritarian figures to wield the power that we willingly give them against our own citizens in the future. Because, as we all know, this Donald Trump regime is not going to be here forever. We do still have to take into consideration the ramifications of our actions into the future. How is this going to impact us? So, last but not least, let's talk about how this will impact us and what Donald Trump really, really wants when he says close the education department. Donald Trump, according to Reuters, says to close the department immediately. On February 12th, Donald Trump said he wanted the federal education department to be closed immediately. He would like to do this using an executive order, but he acknowledged that this would need buy ins from Congress and teachers' unions to fulfill his campaign pledge to do so. An immediate closure of the department could disrupt tens of billions of dollars in aid to K 12 schools and tuition assistance for college students. Trump spent his first weeks in office pushing through massive changes to the US government, demanding federal employees come back to work in offices or quit, seeking cost and job cuts, trying to shut down agencies such as the US Agency for International Development. The education department has been high on Trump's list of targets. He told reporters that he'd like it to be closed immediately. It's a big con job. When you look at our educational numbers in this country, how can you argue with him? When you see the performance on, and I don't even know if this is a study that has been done. I'm sure it has been, but I haven't looked for it. But when you look at the number of degrees versus number of job openings, and then take a survey of how many people have the degree to job ratio matchup, I would be curious to know those numbers because it seems to me that everybody is being told that they can go to college, that they can go graduate from college. All you got to do is pay for it. Just go to college, pay for it, and then you'll get a great job. But the reality is, there are only so many jobs for each degree, and not everybody can actually complete college. Okay. Maybe we have a higher completion rating because of, I don't know, the idea that Chat GPT exists. People don't really have huge challenges in college. I've heard that most colleges are just sermon based lectures and then you get tested out at the end, anyways. So if school in this country is nothing more than doing the checklist, writing off the list of things that need to be completed in order to be given this piece of paper, and the results are not adding up to we have X amount of degrees going into X jobs, and we know for a fact that we're pumping out more engineers, we're pumping out better plumbers, or we're pumping out better tech crews, then what is college really doing for us? And why is it so high on every parent's to do list for their children. Start saving for college, do this for college, to prep them for college, get them ready for college, make them do all these crazy languages for college before you even know what your children are good at in school, before you even know what their desires are, before you even know what they're interested in. Or, maybe you have a kid that doesn't necessarily do well in school and now they're put on some type of, feeling because they're not going to live up to this expectation of society. I thought that was such a bad thing. And yet here we are every time we talk about reforming the way that we look at cookie cutter uh, programs or something based upon pumping out consistent individuals, we get backlash to this. I thought these people were supposed to be progressive. What is so progressive about sitting behind a desk every day listening to a purple haired professor tell you how terrible white cis men are for society? What is what is really progressive about that? Because at this point in time, it just sounds very redundant. And we have enough data to realize that none of that is actually applicable to the real world. So I am all for this. I would really like, again, for individuals to take responsibility for what your kids learn. Yeah, it's a nice standard that we want our kids to read. Yeah, all kids should be able to read. But the truth of the matter is, kids aren't reading at grade level. Our kids are not reading at grade level, and they're required in most states to be in a federal Department of Education program. They can't read at grade level. You have Chicago schools who came out and told you point blank that they weren't necessarily grading children based on their performance in academics, but they were merely giving them participation points for showing up to school. Thank goodness our truancy task force didn't have to go hunt you down to bring you to school. Then you go to places like California where they were hunting down a black family because the child was not in school due to a medical illness. And that woman went to jail, if I'm not mistaken. Look it up. It happened. And I do believe that it was under Kamala's helm at the time in the DA's office back there, because that's how I found out about the story in the first place. But here we are throwing a hissy fit because we want to stop federal dollars from being misspent in the education department because the results are showing us we're not getting what we paid for. We aren't getting the happy, well adjusted children. We aren't getting the upgraded intelligence level that we were promised. What are we getting for this? We're getting the Kia boys. We're getting 13-year-olds in Allegheny County robbing gun stores and caught on public transit buses at 13 pistol with a pistol in his pocket. This is what we're getting for all of the money that we dump into the federal education system. And then on top of all of that, after all of what I just told you, after all this happens with these children, we still don't hold the department responsible. We still don't hold the districts responsible. You know who we go after? We go after the parents. Now, granted, I will give you that some parents are not out here taking care of their children. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what's going on. But you tell me how putting the parents in jail teaches the kids a lesson, because they ain't listening to the parents regardless. They don't care. So the president has previously said he tasked Linda McMahon to pick his pick to be his secretary, education secretary, to shutter the department he wants her to lead. Now, if anybody's, got the balls to do it, you would assume Linda McMahon, of all people, would have the balls to do it. Trump proposed shuttering the education department in his first term, but Congress did not act. Of course they didn't, because they don't want the backlash of uninformed individuals who are not putting two and two together on a bigger picture other than like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my daycare, or oh my God, my kid's not going to learn how to do math, or oh my God, they're not going to learn their ABCs. What are you parents doing with your kids? What I mean, are you speaking in baby talk to them for their entire lives? You literally rely on the public school systems that much? Conservative think tanks that have called for abolishing the education department propose that other agencies could handle its aid programs and oversight duties. Yes, absolutely. And in a lot of cases, they're going to do a better job of it as well. Why? Because they're closer to the children. And in a lot of cases, they're personal to the children. I mean, when you're talking about like homeschool activities and programs that are put together by parents for other parents, you don't run the risk of taking advice from a school board member who is trying to launch their political career. So the easiest thing to get elected for is the school board. And then to make waves, they go in and create all these useless policies and eliminate PTAs and cut funding in music industries and tell kids that they don't have to participate in PE and biology class is just a myth. Like, this is how, in my opinion, how we got here. I cannot in good conscience tell you people that I believe in the Department of Education and the way that they're moving forward, because I don't believe that they're doing a good job. I don't believe that they have your kids' best interest at heart. And I think that they make it harder for the parent to be involved in the children's learning process. Again, I said it before on stream. I will say it again. If you have a conflict with your child inside the school district, it becomes pulling teeth to get information on what happened, where it happened, what they're doing on both sides to make sure that the policies and procedures of the school are being followed for both of the students. There is just nothing but red tape all around. And to be quite honest with you, the day that I pulled my kids out of public school was still the best day of my life, when I knew I was not going to have to deal with these terrible, horrible school resource officers, these incompetent interim principals, these people who are brand new to the education system. And to top all of this shit cherry Sunday off, they don't even have kids of their own. So it's not like they can relate to anything that you're going through with the children either. So, if you are against the Department of Education being shut down, I would ask you to explain why in very slow, meticulous detail to the rest of us who just don't see the benefits that you're seeing. And if you can do that in a clear, concise manner, then maybe we'll talk about reforming this department instead of closing it down. But if you can't come to us with any type of actual data and good conscience, good faith efforts as to why this cannot why this cannot be replaced, then nope, off the table. I want it gone. So, on that note, that is all that I have for you guys today. Thank you so very much for hanging out, everybody on Rumble and YouTube. And of course, Patty's Parlor Games. If you guys are RPGers, you like tabletop games, and you have young kids and like to do activities together, please head over to Patty Parlor's Games and check out his channel. He does a whole world of different things and is connected with a lot of gamers. So if you're not interested in the type of artwork and things that he is producing, then he can put you in contact with somebody who's got something for you. I guarantee it. But on that note, I will have to let you guys go for the day, and I will see you guys on the next one.